Welcome to New York Got Game.
Okay, we are in the thick of things with the Knicks in the NBA playoffs, but you know what we had to do on New York Got Game? We always have to take some time out to talk about the women's basketball team here in the Big Apple. That would be the New York Liberty, and they start their season this week on Tuesday down in the nation's capital as they will battle the Mystics. So it's time for the official New York Got Game Liberty season preview, and there are no two better people to do it with other than the great women's basketball insider Khristina Williams and New York Liberty beat reporter for Winsider Myles Ehrlich. And both join me here in studio now to break it all down. What's going on, guys?
Hey, what's up? It's going good.
What's up with the energy there? You're like, okay, this is the season preview, Khristina. We're supposed to be a little more hyped than that.
I'm hyped. Let's go.
Okay, that sounds better. Myles, I was a little concerned about Khristina there. I was like, I don't know if she's ready for this. I'm like, oh, okay. All right, guys, we got a lot to get into. Glad to have you guys here to talk about this. Let's start with this, and this was going to be for both of you because this is Liberty team coming off of a finals appearance last season, losing to the Aces in 4 games. No major changes to this roster. So with that being said, what are your overall expectations, for this Liberty team this season? Start with you, Khristina.
Yeah, I mean, you said that there were no major changes. I think obviously to the core that's important, so you have that continuity going into the 2024 season. But the reserves on the back end are going to be mainly a lot of new players coming in. So for this Liberty team, it's obviously about keeping that continuity going. And we saw in the preseason that they still need to work on some of that chemistry, just getting acquainted with each other and styles of play and game. But I think that we could expect this team to compete. They're taking last season's loss as a motivation coming into 2024. They know what they need to do. I think they become more familiar with each other on the court. And so we could just expect them to come out and compete to the best of their ability this season.
Well, you know what I love from these answers here from Khristina is you got a bunch of the C words in already. We got chemistry, we got continuity. Myles, what about you? What are expectations for you as you head into this season?
So, yeah, the core staying together was huge, but there was a really big overhaul in the second unit. And that is going to have to play out in real time because most of those players were coming from overseas seasons and got here late. So that's kind of been a struggle, I know, for the coaching staff in training camp. But what's not a struggle, last year, they had to build that chemistry with the first 5. And the players are so much more comfortable with each other already. And it's much more, I think it's easier for them to start with the base, to have those first 5 together, and then fill in those spots with complementary pieces rather than trying to build that chemistry. And we were talking to Jonquel Jones at practice today, and she said that she feels like the spacing's better and the communication is better, and she thinks that the team is moving better. She's like, I don't know if I'm healthy and maybe that's it, or if it's just that we've gotten all these reps together. And I think that a lot of these players won't be in their heads about where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to cut. It's more second nature now.
That makes a lot of sense, right? That it would be easier for you to make the adjustments with the reserves as opposed to the core, as you mentioned, Khristina, and the starting five that we saw having to come together last year. And you were preaching that from the jump, chemistry, chemistry, chemistry. I'm going to get to that. Is there something you wanted to add to what Myles just said?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this training camp was shorter compared to previous seasons, but
right.
Coach Sandy has
thanks
been
for watching
very high on players like Ivana and Leia, who have come over from overseas, saying that they fit right in, and the impact that they've been able to make, especially on the offensive end for the New York Liberty, that it feels a little bit fluid for them. So I think that's important to point out as well.
That is important there, and fluidity is good. Anytime you're bringing in new players, you want them to work into a system, and that also brings up the word chemistry, which Khristina talked so much about last season, especially at the top of the season. So this question is for you, since you are Mrs. Chemistry here. Being around the team at training camp, as you both have, and talking to players and the coaching staff, what can you tell us about the team's chemistry this season? Is there any notable changes? Do you view it as stronger, better than it was last season? What have you observed?
I absolutely do think that it's a lot better this season. Obviously, you're continuing to build off of that core, and they have an experience that they shared. Losing in the finals, again, that brought them closer than ever. I was able to talk to Stewie in training camp, and she told me that, we've been going to team dinners together and just doing stuff off the court to continue to be connected to one another, and that's going to translate on the court when we talk about coming out strong against the Mystics in their first season game of the season this year. So, I'm confident that this is a team that has the right chemistry, and they're going to continue to be connected as the season continues to mature.
There you go, another C word there, connected. I don't like that as well, too. You got to think that's good. Myles, I want to ask you this, because whenever you look at this team, you can look at new additions, right? Can you discuss, from being around this team, the impact of new additions to this team? And I think for a lot of people, most notably, it's going to be Marquisha Davis, right, the 2024 draft pick that we just saw picked by the Liberty. How are all the new additions, including her, fitting into this Liberty system?
So it's been, and I guess kind of like we've talked about already, kind of a strange training camp, because we saw in the preseason that there were missing pieces, because they were able to expand the training camp roster, but then a lot of the big signings this offseason, Kennedy Burke, Leonie Fibish, Ivana Dojkic, were all late to arrive. So they brought in more rookies into camp, and unfortunately had to then cut a bunch of those rookies, and they were in some ways just holding those spots down. But yeah, one player that has been really exciting is the first-round draft pick, Marquisha Davis, and all throughout the organization, and I'm working on a piece on this, but there have been murmurs, comparisons to a young Kalia Copper. And that's something that's really exciting to this franchise, because I spoke to Courtney Vandersloot, who said that she reminds her of Ka in the way that she's got the speed and the ability to get to the rim and break down the defense without a play necessarily being run for her. And when you think about what this team struggled with as a second unit last year, outside of Marine Johannes, there wasn't a lot of offensive generation with that second team. So if someone can be off ball and putting some pressure on the defense, I think that could go a long way to helping them.
And it's funny, when I was looking, because I didn't get to training camp, but when I was watching people post videos, including yourself, Myles, of Marquisha, I saw a lot about what she was able to do in transition, which was very impressive to me, which is something the Liberty it will help their offense, you would think, going into the season, right?
Yeah, and it's a player, they haven't had a player like that, I think, since AD.
With the
AD there,
athleticism.
with that open court athleticism and really pushing the pace. And we know how dangerous they are in transition, and it often leads to trail threes or to some spacing. But if you can have a rim runner besides Stewie to get you some easy buckets and get back set on defense, that can also go a long way to making sure that you're set where you need to be on that end of the floor.
Yeah, Marquisha Davis looks like a very exciting player that the Liberty have picked, and if she has that, the comparisons to a young Kalia Copper, if that is true, if she's anywhere close to that, that's going to help this Liberty team for sure. Khristina, you know this, player development, always important for everyone on the team, but even stars on the squad. So how have the key players on this team, like Sabrina Ionescu, Breanna Stewart, how have they developed their games during the offseason?
Well, I had a chance to not only observe both Stewie and Sabrina in training camp, but also talk to them about what they've worked on in the offseason. Sabrina, she told me that one of her main focuses this offseason was to improve her mid-range game and just to be more versatile and add more things to her bag. So we saw in the preseason how she was just running the floor more, being on ball with the defense, and also mid-range floaters. Like, just seeing her develop a versatile game outside of three-point shooting, I think has been great. And she's just ready to continue to learn and get better. And then Stewie, this was her first season not going overseas. And so she talked about the importance of being conditioned. And last season in exit meeting, she talked about not having enough stamina, right, to play X amount of minutes with the Liberty. And so today she told me, it's all about, for me, being interchangeable. Like, playing different positions, being adaptable and adjusting to whatever coach needs me to do, but also trusting in like the reserves and bench and my teammates that they can get the job done as well. So just being an interchangeable player is something that Stewie said that she's going to put emphasis on this season.
And we saw late in the season last year, we've talked about this here before, about how the minutes, the load that Stewie carried, how that might have impacted her. So her not playing overseas this year, and maybe also, see how Coach Rondello affects her minutes this year, maybe takes a little bit off of her. That could help this team going forward. Myles, we talked about this, you know this. We saw it throughout the season, and most notably in the finals, the issues that the Liberty had defending on the perimeter. How is the team planning to improve their defensive performance this year, and have you seen a focus on that in training camp?
So this is actually a perfect transition off the last question, because something that Sandy Brondello said at practice was that it was on her a little bit how it wasn't just Stewie that was run down by the end of the season. It was also those guards, and that shows up on the defensive end when it comes to some of that sliding, some of that just keeping players in front of you. So some of it will be managing reps, I think, a little more. And something that could help this season is having a 3-week break in the middle. I know that the schedule is condensed before and after the Olympics, but having a little bit of a reset could help players, especially if they're nagging injuries, kind of reset. But when you look at the players that they brought in, the assistant coach, Olaf Lang, said to me the other day that they're excited about Ivana Dojkic being a little bit bigger as a guard coming in. She's about 5'11", but also Leonie Fibish is 6'4", I think 6'4", so. And is going to play the 2, the 3, and the 4, and they want her to actually learn from Benijah Laney and be under her wing a bit. But just having a little bit more size out there is something that they really couldn't bring last year. And while Maureen Johannes was instant offense, the coaching staff even acknowledged that she struggled on the other end of the floor. So that's something that they think that having their second unit come in and having no drop-off, but also maybe a little bit added benefit to the perimeter defense, and we talked about Marquisha before, she can factor in there, that could really help them. Yeah. But yeah, this was a team that they also, the coaching staff is sure to remind you that they were third in defense in the league last year, and that's not to say there is not room to grow, but they're not starting with a blank slate, even though that is an area of focus. And I think now that they're at the top, the margin for error is so small.
That's a great point there, too. And I think when we talk about that defense, what we're really talking about, because Liberty, just to be clear, folks, they were a good defensive team. It was the struggles that we saw, and that's why I said most notably in the finals against the Aces, a team that has such versatile guards and the pressure they can put on you on offense.
But even in preseason against Chicago, we saw the struggles on defense as well. But again, they have Leo now, and Sabrina even pointed out how she would be helpful on the defensive end because she can guard 1 through 4.
Right. And you, Khristina, I'm thinking, just playing off a little about what Myles said there about the defense, you like the size that they have now. Do you think that size can help them against a team like the Aces?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Aces are the team to beat. They have the target on their heads, and teams are adjusting based off their roster. And I think that the Liberty, of course, there's room to grow, but I think that they made the necessary adjustments, especially in the offseason. So. All
right, that's good to hear. I'm sure. Go ahead, Myles.
Yeah, no, and I just want to say, we know that the Aces are fans of this show and that they've been watching. The Aces are still the team to beat and have won back-to-back championships.
Yep.
So when we're having this conversation about those two, it's because the Liberty are still chasing that.
That's right. What Myles is trying to say there is don't take any audio from here that Myles or Khristina says and use it for motivational tactics. No, with Vegas, we love you. We love you. We love what you're doing.
Vegas is still the team to beat coming into the season.
No doubt. We here talking about how the Liberty can get to the mountaintop and get over that hump. But listen, shout out to Las Vegas' social media team. We see you. We see you. We see you. We talked about defense, but on offense, Khristina, I want to ask you this. Do you see any changes to how the Liberty will play this season, and what do you think will be their key offensive tactics in 2024? What are they looking to do on offense?
I think it's going to be keep the main thing in terms of the offensive end. Obviously, you have one of the best players at point guard in Courtney Vandersloot, and so she's always going to find ways to get players open and push the pace in terms of the offense. We know that the Liberty was one of the top offensive teams in 2023. So, again, just continuing to be connected. Jonquel Jones talked to us in training camp, and she said, last year I felt like we were all over the place because we were just learning about each other on the floor, and this year I feel like we are more connected. We know each other's spots, and it's just more fluid. Just bringing that F word back, more fluid on the court. And so she said that they feel more relaxed coming into this season, especially on the offensive end. So I think it's just keeping the main thing. They were a great three-point shooting team for what it's worth. But, again, just that transition offense and pushing the pace, I think they can get a little bit better to clean up.
Yeah, I'd like to see if the pace can increase for them offensively this year. I think that's something to keep an eye on this season. Myles, when we look at players, right, we talked about the core of this team pretty much being the same, but there's differences, changes on the bench. Which player or players could we see have a much larger role with the team this season than they did last season? Who do you think that could be?
A couple of players come to mind, but Nyara Sabali is someone that I'm very interested to see how she's deployed because she had a very, very strong overseas campaign, and she's now another year removed from a pretty serious knee injury. So the coaching staff at the Liberty, they're very excited and very high on Niara. But she'll be slotting into that first big off the bench role. So going from not playing many minutes to having an established role from jump, she's a player that we haven't gotten to see too much because she arrived late in camp. So that could be a big X factor for them. And if she can't meet that moment, then you get into the worries of, okay, now we're going to have Stewie at the 5 like we saw a lot last year, or KT. Yeah, we saw KT play a little bit at the 5 too. So they're hinging a lot there. But then the other player, Leo, we've talked about already, but just we've only seen her in camp a couple of days, but jumps off the page what she can do. I think Liberty fans are very quickly going to fall in love with her game.
All right, so the fans are going to be excited about that. Follow-up for you here, Myles. What did you make? I know we're not down to the final roster cuts at the time of recording this. We still have a day. Final roster cuts will come on Monday when this drops. But what did you make of some of the decisions? And, you know, it's mostly rookies that we saw, young players in there being cut. What do you make of some of the decisions and how you think this final roster will look for the Liberty?
Yeah, so they increased the size of the training camp rosters this year from 15 to 18. So if cuts feel particularly brutal this season, it's because they are. It's because you're seeing more names. That being said, the other side of that is we're having an expansion draft next year as the Golden State franchise comes in, and this is more players getting tape that they can show that they've played preseason games, they can show that they've had these reps in camp, and that's going to be helpful for them down the line or overseas. So there is a benefit to that, even though it is always brutal to see those cut lists. And yeah, as it stands, the Liberty still have 2 more cuts to make. Could be more if they bring in somebody else, but at least 2 more cuts to make. And I believe it's 3 rookies that are fighting for that one spot. And it's Ez Martinez, Jalen Sherrod, and then Marquisha Davis. And I believe that the edge will go to Marquisha because she's a first-round pick.
Right.
And some of the raw skills that we've seen. But I wanted to particularly shout out, both of the other 2. Yeah. As Marie Martinez, I joked with Sandy Brandella, was the first player I ever saw take a charge in training camp from a male practice player, and then she came down the other way and hit a 3 next possession. So she was really 94 feet up and down, bringing some really, really good intensity and competition. And then Jalen Sherrod, from the first day of practice of camp, where she looked like she was still feeling it out and was overthinking.
Yeah, Stewie had mentioned that when rookies came into training camp, she felt like they were a little starstruck, but then they, got into them.
She saw them sort of relax a little bit.
Relax a little
bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll say it turned at the open practice. Mm-hmm. That open practice in front of fans for the first time, Jalen really stood out. And then in both of the preseason games, in smaller minutes, but really equipped herself well, had the game-winning steal and score against Connecticut.
Clutch free throws.
Free throws, yeah. So Jalen absolutely made a push. And coming from undrafted in this year's draft to now surviving the first round of cuts and making this a conversation. Shout out to her for really just battling.
Sounds to me like with both those players, you see them as players that can either be to play other places in this league, or you talked about the expansion draft next year. You see them as WNBA players for sure.
And even potentially later this season.
That's a possibility too,
yeah,
right?
Lots of teams end up claiming some of these players who get waived off of the waiver wire. So it's not the end of the story if they get cut necessarily today or tomorrow. They still have an opportunity to make a WNBA team throughout the season.
Yeah, and I think it speaks volumes when you hear, like from you, Myles, where they've made such an impression on the media, also the coaching staff as well, in how they've played. So that's great to hear there. Now, Khristina, you talked about Breanna Stewart before. We know she was the Liberty's best player last season, wins league MVP. Does Stewie have to play at an MVP level again this season? I'm not saying she has to win the award, but does she have to play at that level in order for this team to be successful?
Obviously, whenever someone's the reigning MVP, you want them to be their best, you want them to play their best. And so the New York Liberty, we saw the success they've had when they played through a player like Jonquel Jones. Obviously, you want Stewie to produce as well. And I think that she's going to get there. She talked about her stamina, and she's gotten better with her conditioning throughout this season. So I think that we will see those spurts from Stewie. But I feel like with this group, she can relax a little bit more, knowing that she can trust her teammates to do certain things on the floor in order for the team to be a success and to win. And so I talked to Stewie about whether she feels the pressure to produce at the MVP level, and she really said, no, I don't feel pressure to produce. I just need to do my best. And so I think that we just wait and see and just make sure that she's in it for the long game. They play 40 games. There's a lot of back-to-backs.
Yep.
I think that her priority is just rest, recovery in between games so that she can be her best for the Liberty night in and night out.
Right, and that's a great point. You want to see her at her best at a high level when it matters the most, which is towards the end of the season and the postseason. Not saying that every game doesn't count, but y'all get my point on that for sure. This is for you both. Because as we look ahead to the season, we all do this. We look at the schedule. We start picking things out. What games or matchups are you both looking most forward to with the Liberty this season, and why? Myles, I'll start with you on this one. What matchups do you have circled on your calendar that you can't wait to see?
The home opener, for starters, because that is Indiana coming to New York. And that's also the first time we're going to see the Barclays Center filling up since it was completely filled out last year for the finals. So I'm keeping a particular eye on the ratio of Caitlin Clark jerseys to New York Liberty jerseys, because I want to see, I know there are a whole bunch of new fans coming through, but I want to see the momentum carry over from last year and how much of that we see. And then, yeah, it's really some of the new teams I'm really interested to see. Maybe, I don't know if it's against New York, but in general, but when you see the changes that have happened in Seattle and in Phoenix, those two in particular. Connecticut really pushed New York last year, and now they have Bree Jones back. So I think it's really looking at that top half of what I think the standings are going to look like, because we talked about margin for error before. It was those two teams, New York and Las Vegas, that were vying for those top two spots. But I think that tier behind them really closed the gap.
You're saying Phoenix is a top tier team?
I said I want to see it. I said I want to see it.
Okay.
Myles, Khristina tried. She was like, wait, what are you saying here?
No, I just wanted to make
They
sure
were very active in free
clarified.
agency. They were very active.
They were very active, but, good names on paper. Let's see what they do in terms of production during the season. I'm not completely
But to the point that Myles was making, though, right?
Yeah.
In that what we saw last year with the Liberty and the Aces vying for those top two spots, and then right behind when you had Connecticut and you had some other teams, coming up, even in the bottom half, Atlanta in the bottom half of the playoff, we're pushing people, and those teams are going to be hungrier. So there's a lot of, I don't say balance, because I think the teams at the top are still the teams at the top, but there's a lot of matchups to be intrigued by this season, right? But what about you, Khristina? I don't know if you're trying to throw shade to Phoenix.
I'm not trying to throw shade to Phoenix. I'm just saying we saw what happened with the Los Angeles Sparks when they had all of those big names on the bill a few years ago under Derek Fisher, and it just did not pan out to work. And so
we also saw it in Phoenix a couple of years ago.
We saw it in Phoenix a couple of years ago, and for this Phoenix team, it's going to be, can this team stay healthy to play 40 games? Brittany Griner, she was in a cast recently in preseason. Diana Taurasi has had back issues. So for me, is will this core stay healthy for 40 games to compete with teams like the Aces and Liberty? And then how are they going to gel and mesh under a new coach?
Right. There's been a lot of change.
There's a lot. So I'm not saying Phoenix is not going to be good. I'm just not completely sold 100%. At the start of the season.
Understood.
But to answer your question,
yes.
I am excited to see the Chicago Sky against the New York Liberty, obviously because the preseason game was just an eye shocker for everyone. The New York Liberty got blown out by almost 50 points. Just to see that matchup again, Stewie, Angel Reese, who is a star in her own right. I'm excited to see them play, and obviously Teresa Witherspoon is a New York Liberty legend, so to see her come back to Barclays and as a coach, as a first-time head coach, I'm super excited about that matchup. Obviously, the Las Vegas Aces is a team in a matchup that we want to see, the finals rematch with two of the best players in the league right now, Asia Wilson, Breanna Stewart. They made some adjustments last season. In the offseason, the Aces adding players like Megan Gustafson, Kate Martin, Daisha Fair, who's one of the top NCAA scorers in history. So that's going to be a matchup that I'm going to be excited to see. Yeah,
those Aces and Liberty matchups last year were amazing. We were all together in the building for a bunch of them, including the finals. So those are going to be fun. That's going to be good. See, now I'm going to be really excited. I can't wait to be next to you when Phoenix comes to town.
Listen.
I can't wait.
So all I was going to add, though, is
I want all the smoke with my.
I see that. I see that.
I'm just saying.
Go ahead, Myles. I'm sorry.
Yeah, all I was going to add was that this is a veteran team that we're covering here in New York, and they would have been upset with this entire answer because this is a team that does not like to look further than one game. So the right answer was DC on Tuesday. That was the correct
That's
answer.
exactly what Sandy said in practice. No, that's exactly what Sandy said in practice. Our only focus right now is DC.
Yep.
One game at a time. So,
and you're right.
Exactly.
That would have been the team company line, I want to say. But in what we have to do here, we got to predict. We got to look ahead. We have to look at things. So they open up, as you said, in Tuesday in D.C. Then they're out to Indiana. Then back home next Sunday against the Fever, which should be a crazy crowd at Barclays. Okay, but we just talked about predictions. Now it's time for predictions.
Oh, gosh. Here we go.
I don't know. Khristina, I don't even know. I think I know that you don't want
Here's the
predictions.
bulletin board material that every WNBA team is about to clip for their motivational purposes.
Start recording now.
Start recording now and take Myles and Khristina's voice for whatever you want to use it. But, guys, it's prediction time. So I want you to give me your prediction for the Liberty's performance during the regular season, as well as how far you predict them to go in the postseason. Khristina, since I know you love predictions, I know that you love predictions. I'm going to have you start first. What's your prediction for the Liberty for this 2024 season?
My prediction is that the New York Liberty is going to play some very good basketball this season.
Oh, come on. Come on, Khristina. They're going to play very good basketball. Can we get a win total?
A win total.
Come on.
Okay. So last season they lost 2 games. They were 38-2, right?
They were 32-8.
32-8. My bad. Getting my numbers mixed up. But they were 32-8. I predict they win at least 30 games this season. They have at least 30 in them. It all depends on like the health of the players. You know, like Jonquel Jones, Sabrina Ionescu, Breanna Stewart. You know, they've all had some issues last season, which they said they feel physically fine coming into this season right now. But yeah, I'm going to say they win at least 30 games, and they definitely are going to make the postseason. So
how far do you see them going in the postseason?
We have to wait and see.
There we go. Not willing to put any length of how far the Liberty will go in the postseason. All right, Myles, I'm hoping you can say your prediction with your chest to rile some of the people up for some motivation here. What's your prediction for the Liberty this season? Win total, how far do you think they go in the playoffs?
So I do think that I would not be surprised if the win total came down from the franchise record of 32. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I think if that means that they are experimenting with rotations and if that means they're taking some of the load off, there was a lot to prove for this team last year. And they played really hard for that Commissioner's Cup win midway through the season, but also thinking about being smart around the Olympic break because we know Breanna Stewart's going to be on that team. And there's a potential that Sabrina Ionescu could be on that team as well. When you look around the league, you look at some of these top teams, and they're going to have multiple players representing them. So I think it's really, even if they win 28 or 29 games instead of 32, I don't think that's necessarily a step back if they're fresher for the postseason. And when you get into the postseason, I still think that they are one of the top 2 teams. And am I ready to dethrone the Aces without us seeing them lose a step? I'm very, very curious to see the state of Chelsea Gray's health because Becky Hammon has been very, very shady about some of the comments, and even in their preseason game went as far as to say that Chelsea was out coach's decision when we've heard that there was no way she was getting close to suiting up for that game in particular. So they didn't, in my eyes, add all that much depth in terms of their offseason. I think they had a very similar offseason to New York in terms of how they retooled. So it's still, for me, between those 2 teams, but it's going to come down to health. So I can't predict too far into the future on that.
I do want to say that a team to watch, obviously, is going to be Seattle. Skylar Diggins-Smith is back, 6-time WNBA All-Star, 6-time All-WNBA alum. And her last season before her maternity break, she was an All-Star. She made All-WNBA first team. And so her and Drew Lloyd is one of the strongest backcourts, I think, that we've seen to date. And they've also added Nneka Ogwumike, who was an MVP runner-up last season. They've like what I've seen flashes in preseason, I like what I see defensively. I'm liking what I see on the offensive end as well. So they're definitely going to have something to say this season when it comes to wins and postseason and just getting back to being a championship contention team.
Yeah. The one thing I want to add for New York fans, because I know they're going to want us to have a prediction as well, is
yeah, they are.
We love you, New York fans. We love you.
There was a great article from Ben Pickman at The Athletic where he spoke to Breanna Stewart, who talked about how she's not used to losing these championships and that she now has a motivation that she hasn't had really before, which is to try to bounce back after taking an L and watching another team celebrate. So if you're a Liberty fan and you're saying what is different from last year to this year, I think that chip on her shoulder is new. And you've got other players that obviously all of them want to win that. But Stewie has gotten to the mountaintop before a whole bunch of times and has not walked away without that trophy much.
I saw that quote in the article from Ben Pickman there, from The Athletic, who did a great job with that. And I do think we could end with that. One of the things that I think is interesting about the Liberty is the motivation, that chip on their shoulder. When you have a great player like Breanna Stewart, who is, she said, used to winning.
Yeah.
She didn't like that feeling of losing.
And I spoke to Sabrina about that very thing in training camp today, and she talked about, again, that loss being a motivator, that loss bringing the team closer together to get to that ultimate goal of wanting to bring the first championship in franchise history to New York. So, I mean, they've got it. They've got the right attitude.
The motivation is there. Everything that you guys have said in covering training camp sounds right, sounds good, but now it's time to play these games, right?
Yep. No excuse, just produce.
I like that.
It's not my saying, but
I know it's not. But you didn't even use the C word in this. I like it too. That does it for our Liberty season preview. You know we had to do it on New York Got Game. Really have to thank my guests who they're the ones I always have to have here to talk about the Liberty. The great Khristina Williams, women's basketball insider. Myles Ehrlich, for Winsider, does a great job covering the Liberty. Also check out his podcast, which I forgot to mention at the beginning. Pull Up with Myles and Owen. Check that out as well, too. Oh, see, I got to give you the plug there, Myles. Always got to do that.
Appreciate that.
Got to do that. We're going to get both of these two later in the season. We'll see what their predictions are. We'll see how they're going. It's early now. It's just still preseason, technically. We'll get there. Thanks for rocking with us on New York Got Game. Appreciate y'all.
And thanks for watching New York Got Game. Boom shakalaka.